Right, so we'll open up the meeting. Welcome everyone. Morning. Morning.
Morning.
Morning.
I have to leave at 8, just to let you guys know. I think I'm gonna be more ready.
Thanks for the heads up, Gary. I'm just gonna pull up my agenda. Give me 1 second. Got all these things bookmarked now, so there we go. All right. I'll open this up for public comment. Are there any members of the public or those who'd like to comment on anything not on the agenda? Okay.
I don't know that this counts as public comment necessarily, but the audio in the room is a little hard. Is it, Gary, are you having trouble hearing Dave?
Yeah, it's kind of breaking up. It is hard. I hear you fine, Eric. I don't know why. But...
We hear you just fine. Yeah. You guys are coming fine.
Sounds like the owl is really far away.
Right. Taking flight.
Right there. Let me we'll give a second. Trying to transfer the host back to the computer. For some reason its connection is always better than mine. Is that improving at all?
Not too much.
Appreciate the honesty. Yeah. I'm going to tell you a story so you can see whether it's getting better.
Not better now.
Well, while we are testing the microphone, I will run through the agenda. How about that? So that we all know what's coming.
Sounds good.
For this, we will review the minutes, and we will spend 10 minutes on the ERF funding mechanisms as a follow-up to a conversation that we had in August. We will spend most of our time today talking about the conservation chapter of the town plan. Andy was kind enough to send us some links. Some of us were able to log on, some of us were not. Hopefully all of us at least read it, and that will be the main focus. We have a standing agenda item this fall on the Jacob Krantz parcel that we will close out the meeting with. Anything working better on your end, guys?
I don't know. I don't think it's a lot better, but if I concentrate really hard, I can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. It does challenge our concentration.
Is it like cutting in and out?
Yeah, it is. Sometimes I lose a word here and there.
Should we just turn it off?
Yeah. Mine is also actually low.
Yeah, mine too.
Fine. You need an Ethernet connection.
That audio from, I guess, from Andrew's computer actually almost sounds better than the owl.
Just plug the owl back in. Is that still bad?
Yeah, it's challenging, like Eric said. Yeah.
All right. How's that? Is that better?
That's better. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so let's open up the minutes,
Okay.
and if everyone can hear us, thumbs up.
Yep.
Great.
Go
with it.
It's facing that way.
Try not to look at the owl, or you might get an infinity mirror.
All right, well, we can't see you anyway, so it doesn't matter.
There
Look at the owl all you want.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right now we can.
Okay.
Now we can.
There you go. Okay.
Fantastic.
All right. Get the minutes up. I have not yet read them because I was focusing on the conservation thing, so I'm just giving them now, David.
All right, I skimmed everything at 11 o'clock last night, so it's. I thought I did not see anything personally on my end in the agenda that needed, correcting, but.
I saw 6.2, it looked like, there was the second sentence says Deb asked about, and then nothing.
Oh, it trails off.
So we could just erase that.
All right, technical difficulties now solved. Do I have any, do I have a motion to approve the minutes or are people still reading?
Still reading if you give me grace for a moment.
Yep.
I pull my brain to start speed reading and it's booting up.
And 4.7, where it says Laura asked about requiring more public spaces in rural Williston. Maybe I'm not remembering exactly what I was talking about, but I thought I was talking about public spaces generally in Williston.
Okay.
Yeah, that conversation was kind of, we were talking about both and
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I probably wasn't clear.
no, that's okay.
I'm almost there.
I also noted that the observer picked up on my completely off the cuff remark about having a contest for naming the Krantz.
That's
parcel.
right.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, you
Your
gotta be
brilliance,
careful what you
your
say.
brilliance shone through.
I still like that idea. I
Yeah.
just, you
Yeah.
know, an unvetted.
I like it too.
I actually, I was hoping to talk a little bit more about that today as part of our.
Okay,
Wow. New Valley Park District. I think it'd be
Yeah.
a good way to get people involved. So more to come.
I like it a lot better than just calling it Jacob Krantz. I mean, who is he? Why are we naming a park after him, other than it was his land? I mean, I like the idea of like keeping a trail, like Jacob's Loop or something, that could be a, but, you know, keeping the
You
naming.
can enter the contest. I'll move approval of the minutes as amended.
Thank you, Reed. Second,
Second,
thanks, Laura. Let's approve the minutes. All voting in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye. Approved, no objection. So. Let's get into the ERF. We have a update from Andrew on a conversation that we had earlier in the summer.
Yes, yeah, so there was some discussion about different funding mechanisms for the ERF. Both through the town plan and also kind of separate from that, there's been some discussion about this kind of penny for open space idea. And given the discussion, I ran it past Eric Wells. And we had a conversation about how to properly do that, go about kind of investigating that. And so just kind of trying to reflect process and, you know, do it in the right way. And so I'd just like to share with you what Eric told me, which is that the proper way for that to happen would be if this committee was to investigate that, that would come from the select board as a request that they would ask us to, investigate what that would look like. The broad context here is that there are a few different kind of penny for
Initiative.
yeah, like the penny on the rate idea is being applied to a few different initiatives in town. And so open space is a discussion that we've had, but I know that the housing committee has also discussed that for the housing trust fund. There's a penny for paths kind of initiative. There's some talk about that. And all in the context as well of the other capital projects that the town is considering. And so I had that conversation with Eric, and basically it is something that has been reviewed as part of the larger budget conversation with the select board. So it is on the radar. What Eric really anticipates is that conversation will be part of this upcoming budget season, of that like penny on the rate conversation. And that the ERF can be part of that, but it is a slice of it. And so what Eric recommended to me was that for now, the work of the WCC would be to focus in on, you normally do that memo around this time every year in the fall. Eric said like end of October this year would be a good time to have that. So it's something that we should start thinking about. But in that memo, if there's a request for a certain dollar amount, that's an option. You could also include a request for that to be a priority. To have the ERF or the penny on the rate conversation be a priority. And so that could be included in that memo for, if that's something that you're interested in, that you can include that. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So I feel like, I think I heard you say, Andrew, that, just to summarize, that the town is considering several different penny on the tax rate options for funding different programs. And then Eric was suggesting that we include that recommendation in the ERF memo. Is that what? Okay. I feel like we've suggested that in the past too, so it shouldn't be too hard to put that together.
Right.
I mean, a slight difference that I've heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
That procedurally, what I heard was that the select board must ask WCC to investigate it, that we can't just investigate it on our own. What is the material difference there between the select board?
Yeah, that does seem fishy to me. No. Yeah, I mean, we're a advisory board. We make recommendations. Why can't that be a recommendation from us that we consider that? That's just my opinion.
So in the conversation about considering it and like the due diligence that we'd be doing, I think my assumption is that a lot of that would be through public outreach, that we'd be, this committee would be doing public outreach about that.
Okay.
And the goal is for the approach to that penny on the rate to be unified and not be multiple discussions that are happening at different times. And so with the different penny on the rate initiatives going on, Eric is looking for priority from the select board to then be doled out to the respective committees. So for example, if the select board said, we'd like to, prioritize penny on the rate for housing, we're going to do outreach, or maybe it's housing and open space, and those are done at the same time. And maybe it's a collaborative approach between the housing committee and this committee. Basically, we don't want to be doing separate outreach initiatives, under the guise of the town, and kind of really getting to a point where it's, why are we talking about this again? I thought we already had this conversation.
I can also appreciate that you don't want every committee just picking its own thing and doing a big public outreach and making the town think and get all a flutter that something's going to happen in a specific way, and then
Yeah,
but it doesn't have the select board sort of like interest or attention.
Right.
Yeah, agreed.
So the sorry, can I ask a question?
Please.
The outreach piece, I guess I'm a little confused on that. So that what would the goal of the outreach would be to what, to get voters to buy into the penny on the tax rate as a part of the overall budget package that they vote on town meeting day?
Eric, what I think I'm hearing say is that if we were going to do a penny on the dollar anything, it would probably come down to a vote of some sort anyhow. And you would need to do public outreach to both investigate how it would be used, what is the goal, like just general outreach and education about this as a concept. I would call it like education and awareness campaign that may result in a recommendation to the select board. That recommendation may be a recommendation to like to put it on the ballot, to vote on it, to inform the WCC's recommendation to the select board, not necessarily to like, not as like a big push to like get this through or something like that. That would seem like something else.
All right. I think I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, Laura,
And how does the select board know that we're interested in this?
the letter in October.
The letter in October. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd be reiterating your interest in that.
Like, hey, if
Okay.
you
Formalizing.
Yeah.
Right.
if you
Formalize
tell
your
us to
interest.
look into it, we'll look into it.
Right, yeah. Basically, Eric showed me there's a table that I believe was a document that was submitted to the select board that summarized the different budget conversations that need to go on, and some of those were capital projects, some of those were things like the ERF Housing Trust Fund, and basically the select board had created like a priority list. This was on that list. I don't think it was listed as a like number one priority. And so if this committee is interested in that, I think reiterating that and making sure that stays
Trying to get it bumped up the list.
in their minds, I think that is the appropriate way to do it. And yeah,
Yeah.
My comment was gonna be, I do think a written memo from the WCC to the select board to basically start that dialogue with them is the right thing for us to do. But I think October's too late because the budget season goes by so quick. I feel like if there's any chance of it happening for fiscal year 2025, right, that just began. Right, so fiscal year 2026, which would begin next July. I just don't see a memo from us in October leading to it getting into the budget that goes into effect next summer.
When was the memo prepared last year? I remember us working on it, but I also remember feeling it.
That's
right.
I think
It was later. I was
Yeah.
very slow in putting it together last year, so I feel like it was like
Giving or something. That's our
yeah.
traditional dollar value ask, and like that is, I mean, in one meeting, the select board can go from a placeholder value to deciding based on our memo what to put in there. Whereas completely changing the funding mechanism to me is gonna be a back and forth. It's like, I imagine we write a memo that says funding hasn't been reliable. This is a mechanism we think will stabilize that funding.
You think that this is gonna happen by the next budget? You wanna schedule according to,
I feel like if
Get
we
it
don't,
into
we're
April.
basically saying it's a 2027 fiscal year item, which is 18 months away. And
yeah.
that just seems like it, I mean, if that's what we want to do, that's okay, but it seems like there's a choice here. If we don't kind of get a move on, I don't see it happening before
But
that.
I think the larger point is that if there's gonna be a delay, don't have it be because of our memo, right?
Being
But-
late, yeah.
Right. Yeah. it's a
Thunder.
fair point.
And I think last year's memo around ERF funding was, we actually made significant changes or enhancements to it compared to prior years. So I think we don't actually have that much new to say this year about the ERF or our strategy, or I think that was the first time we officially said we're trying to support state goals of 30 by 30 and 50 by 50, and here's what we think our contribution should be. And those things are now going into the town plan drafting that we're doing. So it feels like most of it's probably written. The section that's missing is a like A-B. If we're going to fund it traditionally, this is what we're asking for.
Yep.
Or we would prefer or recommend that the select board begin sort of like opine on whether a penny on the tax rate is a priority for them.
Well,
For
let's
conservation.
put this on the agenda for next meeting, and let's dust off the memo that we submitted and have that conversation for real.
I'm happy to work offline on this one, David, if it's something that the commission would like.
I think we should have the discussion first, because I think everyone on this commission has an opinion on this, right? And I think what we could probably do is, at the very least, Andrew, if you could highlight what needs changing at the minimum. You know, there's gonna be a lot of conservation principles stated in our memo from last year, but there's gonna need to be an update to those very specific, sections. So if staff could identify what is the minimum needed to change, we can focus on that, and then do the off-camera work if needed about boosting it up in any way possible. Because my personal preference is that I love the idea that the town is considering a penny on the tax rate for all of those great topics. And I have no idea if the ERF is in need of a penny on the dollar. It could be that the town just needs a penny on the dollar for all of those things, and then they need to have a separate budget process within that penny on the dollar revenue as just sort of like a necessary investment. So I think that's the discussion that we should be having.
Like, is a penny the right amount?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Andrew, you pulled up the memo from last year. This is what I'm suggesting that we talk about in 2 weeks.
Gary does have his hand raised.
I just had a quick question about how much is a penny on the dollar now?
Right. We did that
Um,
math a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember.
I was just curious of how that fits into what our last year's request was and what we might ask for this year.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was.
That would be, could you get that number for us by
Yeah.
next week? I mean, when Matt was here, you were out. We did that number. It was very quick, and it wasn't even like back of the envelope. It was like a paper bag level.
Is that a higher level?
Yeah, I'd love to have an actual estimate of what a penny on the dollar would
Yeah,
be,
that'd be
so
helpful.
inform the discussion
Right,
for our recommendation.
can do.
Great. All right, anything further on that topic? So we'll get back to it in 2 weeks, and then we'll probably start doling out homework after that.
Are you, from me, or are you looking for updates to the statistics in that memo? Or
Whatever you think can be updated in 2 short weeks.
okay,
I think, Andrew, I do think, I don't know necessarily over the next 2 weeks, but if we can just add to that chart that's in there,
Yep.
so the chart ends at 23, if we're gonna add 24 to that chart,
Yeah.
that would be great.
And it may not have to be done. You could just highlight, like
Yeah.
the work for the next 2 weeks could just be to highlight, these are the things that need
Right.
updating, and here's a work plan to sort of get us there.
that makes sense.
Okay,
Sounds good.
great. Then we are gonna move on to the conservation chapter. And back to Andrew. I'm gonna let you lead this conversation as
Okay.
you have an agenda for what you want to get out of it.
Full disclosure, I understand that Andrew's instructions to us were to not wordsmith and add comments. I couldn't do that last night. I'm sorry. I had to. If you really don't like what I added in the body of the plan, just delete my edits.
having reviewed them, Eric, from my perspective, they are helpful. I think for our conversation today, focusing on more broad concepts, will be more beneficial. And my
Yeah,
intent
I agree.
was to really, well, I was hoping that everyone had a chance to at least read through the goals, and kind of read through the goals, strategies, goals, objectives, strategies, actions, matrix, and looking for things that, you know, if you had any red flags or things that either you think shouldn't be included, you disagree with, or things that you think are missing. I think that some of the comments from both Eric and Melissa were also helpful, and I can also just highlight some of those if there isn't a whole lot of conversation going on, but
Well, I've got lots of comments, don't worry.
okay. Yeah, so we can, I mean, if we can just start at the top of the goals and kind of work our way through. The background, just for anyone who might not have picked up on it or hasn't reviewed it. This broad goal is supposed to, you know, cover most of it and discuss, you know, what the goal of conservation is in Williston. And then these objectives are kind of categorized out, and I've labeled what their main focus is, just to try to make it a little bit more clear. And so we can start there.
Great, did you have your hand up?
Sure, I was just gonna comment on the broad goal. There were only two things that stuck out to me. One is, I thought something that seemed new from prior plans, maybe it's not, and I'm just not remembering, but the mention at the end of the first paragraph of outdoor education and scientific research. I thought those were really important, and I was really delighted when I was reading through and saw them in there. I think, for instance, the Middlebury researchers who came and wanted to partner with us for a study on Sucker Brook, which I assume is upcoming. I think those are really valuable things to have listed in our goal for conservation. And then the second paragraph, the second to last line, where it says including areas near Taft Corners, I felt like emphasizing it further by saying emphasizing areas near Taft Corners seems to be kind of a theme of our conversations heading into this plan. So those were my only two comments on the goal. I just wondered whether including wasn't strong enough.
Anyone else have comments? Is this how you want to proceed with this, Andrew? Is to review this from the goal perspective and taking comments like the ones we just provided?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think any feedback as far as, you know, Reed called out the outdoor education, scientific research. If there are other ways that you think the town can support those things, you know, I don't think that's
like, where does it show up in the objectives and strategies? Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's just a kind of an outstanding thing for me to add, but
yeah, I guess your yellow team, I would like, maybe it'd be good to just write down a note to think about that aspect, since it jumped out at me in the goal. And so if we think there's specific objectives and strategies and actions for it, great. If there aren't specific then just having that aspiration listed there means that as opportunities arise, like the Middlebury group coming to us, we at least have something in there that says this is part of what our intention is for the next 8 years.
Great. So yeah, let's just keep the pace up. We'll go just keep scrolling through. So this next section is on future conservation. mostly conservation through easements and acquisition. I have a point I think we can discuss, but I'll let everybody else kind of weigh in.
I wanted to just pause and reflect on, these goals. The state's objective to conserve 30% of Vermont by 2030 and 50 by 2050, and Williston will conserve 30% by 2050. You know, I get it. We're not gonna go for all 50%, but I just think we should discuss that.
Yeah. Perhaps there needs to be a statement there that explains why that is our target.
Yeah.
Like, given the makeup of Williston's
Yeah,
economic and residential zones, we think 30% is an achievable but significant target, something like that.
yeah, I think, first off, does everyone agree that 30% is the right number? It seems like an aspirational target, given the following sentence. So I don't necessarily disagree with the concept. Does anyone disagree with 30%?
I think it's reasonable and aspirational to try to go for 30%, 50%. We know we'd never be able to get that, given the type of community that Williston is, suburban area of Burlington, Chittenden counties, the most urbanized county in Vermont, and all of that. So I think that 30%, just looking at what we've conserved so far, 3,000 acres, and we would need to conserve another 2,000 acres to hit 30%. Even that seems pretty aspirational. That would be what, 4 more, that'd be 8 more catamounts, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be,
Yeah. We'd probably be jumping up and down if we reached 30%, right?
Yeah, not 8. So it'd be 5 more catamounts, but still, it's a lot.
I think the like preamble to that statement is like, given the unique character of being both like quasi-urban and rural, the nature of our community is not suitable to preserving 50% of it. Some kind of affirmative statement that sort of recognizes that Williston's not one of those communities that's gonna get to 50%, which inherently would mean that other communities will have to get to above 50% in order for the goals.
And there are other, the Northeast Kingdom, for example, that's a lot more practical, and there's some communities that already have exceeded 50% with very large landholders in the Northeast Kingdom.
So, okay.
I just wanted to quickly comment. I think the 30% is good, but I also think that we might want to say a minimum of, or something like that, because who knows? I mean, there may be different ways of conserving or something in the future that would, or some big land acquisition and gift that would exceed 30%. And I don't want us to say, oops, we already reached 30, we don't need it. I don't know. That's my opinion.
I actually have one more thought about that one, David, which is, given how much we have to think ourselves about what counts as conserved and not conserved, I was wondering whether a simple definition of what the town of Williston classifies as conserved, like a literally something that says like definition of conserved land, this is what our town's definition is, might be a good thing to have somewhere up near the top, so that people will have like in their mind, like, okay, we're just talking about this, and we're acknowledging these other things that we are not calling
I
conserved.
think that's a great point, Reed, because it's not just a catamount, right? You don't need 5 more catamounts, you need like 5 more Sipple farms, right? And that counts towards that, and it's totally different land uses.
Yeah.
And it could be a range of uses. It could say this could range from, totally wild, try to minimize impacts to, areas where we have paths and trails and,
Agricultural uses.
yes, yeah.
Laura?
Yeah, I was gonna talk about the paths and trails also, because,
Yeah.
you know, we have streams running through the town that are wildlife corridors. Why does it need to be town versus wild, right? It needs to be integrated.
And I think a lot of that content maybe already is in the background at the top, but
Right.
maybe condensing, summarizing it into like a specific definition.
Mhm.
These are the types that we recognize, and these are the ones that we call conserved land.
Agreed.
That could actually be a good follow-up to that goal, which is recognizing that 30% is gonna be exceptionally hard. We're gonna have to push that definition to mean more than what it is now, like Laura, your idea of like riparian zones being protected, like that could just, that's not anything that's in our sort of like current suite of definitions.
Mhm.
You know, it's just a landowner's stream that we want to connect with the next landowner's parcel and protect down the line, but that doesn't like count today.
Right,
It doesn't count towards the 30%.
and if it
But maybe
did,
it should.
yeah, and if it did, we
Yeah.
could push for more of that in even the growth center. With the parks, and whatever, streams.
Eric has his hand raised.
Eric? Oh, you're muted, Eric. Nope, you're muted.
Huh.
Gary, can you hear him? We can't hear him. Uh-oh.
No, I can't hear him either.
Okay, so
We can hear you now, Gary. Eric, can you try again? Oh.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Oh, no.
you write a chat.
Yeah, so
Oh,
I'm gonna read your.
Yeah, he's gonna.
That's interesting what you were saying, David, about a change in our definition or our thinking can also impact where we are at relative to 30%. And I think we heard that, who was it who came and spoke about the state efforts? Who was that? Somebody from,
Housing and Conservation Board.
yeah, it was a consultancy that's been hired to help
That's
the
right.
state figure out what does 30 by 30 mean and how do we achieve it and stuff, and they were talking about those different, that we may have, or the definitions may change. And that we have like our aspirational list of like fully conserved, there's a conservation easement or whatever, and then in order to get further, we may actually need to think more creatively and say, well, like for instance, in our case, open space parcels, how do we over time either come to recognize them as
Yeah.
sort of conserved or work to change them over from being just open space parcels to being somehow formally conserved.
It could also be when we review a wildlife assessment and we ask them to move the house's footprint over 20 feet or something, like, is there a point at which we say like, oh, well, we did something to protect that, and should that count? Or is it, because it is now protected somewhat from at least that initial development. So there could be a discussion in this plan about thinking more broadly about what conserved and protected means in that context of just decision-making and permitting and just maintenance.
This gets into the conversation about what I've labeled it as is regulatory conservation.
Oh, we heard you.
We can hear you now, Eric, too.
Great.
I've just pulled up the section on regulatory conservation. I don't want to butt in too much on the conversation and let Eric maybe, or yeah, Dave, you can.
Go ahead, Eric.
All right, thanks. Sorry, I don't know what happened with that, but anyway, my suggestion or thought was I wonder if we could maybe get a student to update the ERF map or add to the ERF map to highlight what the town might look like if we met that 30% conserved lands goal to help just as a visual illustration of where we are now with conserved land, 16% or whatever of land town is conserved, what the
Like a
town might look like
scenario.
if we hit 30%. Yeah.
I think it should be, I'll let Gary respond, and I'll go next.
Well, my response was not directly related to that, but I thought of another thing that I don't know if we mentioned yet, but Laura mentioned the riparian zones and such, but we could include every wetland and the buffer for it that we in town too, which I would think, if we start adding all those things up, if we think they qualify as conserved land, that could add a chunk to what we already have.
Right. That's a great point. I didn't see wetlands called out here specifically, but I think in that context, certainly could. So maybe that could be a good recommendation. I just wanted to add on Eric's suggestion about a visual and putting town or putting property lines in the town plan could get sensitive.
Yeah.
So I would leave it to the discretion of how the town would want to do it, but I like the idea of a visual so that you could sort of like 8 more catamounts or whatever. And then just have it like overlaid with the town in a certain clearly
Specific, not parcel
Specific,
specific way. Yeah.
right.
It's
Yeah.
almost like you need a scale kind of, it won't be the shape of a parcel, but like a scale shape showing how large that land area is, either on the map or
Yeah.
in the area. And so it's like the map behind you there is the 2016 comp plan protected open space map. And so you can see all those green parcels. And sorry, online, I don't think you won't be able to see it, but
That's
It's
all right.
the-
I'm familiar with it.
it's a lot of green, and so maybe having another, even if it was just a circle.
But off to this, well, I like the idea of saying 5 more catamounts or 3 more catamounts and 2 more cycle farms. Like take some of the example already conserved ones,
Mhm.
take those shapes and put them next to the map and say, this is what's left, this amount of space, and we're just using examples of already conserved ones that would add up to the right acreage.
Mhm.
And like let your brain think about taking that and putting it on the map. And like that's how much more we have to go.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, those are all good suggestions.
That way it's not parcel specific and
Yeah.
people don't get touchy about, oh, mine is listed as conserved or not conserved on the scenario.
I would hate for a map like that to be a reason for people to start
Right.
showing up and arguing against it, you know what I mean? Like, because that's not the point.
So this sort of touches on 2 different conversations. The first of which is that regulatory conservation that we discussed, and someone mentioned open space and including that in the the total count of that 30%. I should clarify, I mean subdivision open space, and it is included on that 2016 map, and the wetlands and buffers are also kind of fall under that regulatory conservation, and the line there is, I think that subdivision open space. Well, I should back up. The Act 59 30x30 and 50x50 goals, the last I heard, they were trying to really nail down what will count towards that 30%.
That was the presentation we heard. They said they
right.
hadn't nailed down the definitions. They're working on that.
Yes. And so that's sort of a TBD. I think for our numbers so far, we've used subdivision open space, but a big asterisk there is that that's really just based on what the town plan says and what the zoning bylaw says, that those parcels can't be developed based on those things. Both the town plan and the zoning bylaw can change. I don't really anticipate that being a very popular thing in Williston. but it is something to consider, and I've included that in the plan under that regulatory conservation section. I think Eric, maybe. He asked, is this practical? How do we future-proof zoning bylaws? When that's really, we can state it in the town plan, but every year or every 8 years, when the town plan is rewritten, that needs to be, we're saying right now that needs to be included in the town plan, that won't change. But there is sort of that future-proof question. And I think that goes along too with the questions with, we've been talking about the Family Forest Research Center and those smaller parcels. I think that those open space parcels are included there. And my answer, given my experience, is that there isn't a clear way to ensure that won't change besides including it in the town plan and very kind of overtly stating that is not negotiable. The other topic that I think you touched on, and I'll go back up to the conservation through easements and acquisition, is a discussion about the ERF policy. And Gary mentioned or maybe it was Eric mentioned the map. I think Reed's comments, some of Melissa's comments have touched on maybe adjusting what the ERF is used for, and focusing on parcels that might not be high priority on the current map. I have to refresh myself, but like the Borough of Knoll, right next to Maple Tree Place, is an example of a conservation area that is identified as valuable. Are places that are closer to the growth center weighted as highly, and is that something that you want to consider as, add to this town plan that you'll continue to reassess and maybe amend the ERF policy in the life of this town plan? I don't think that would be a small project, but yeah, I'll stop there, and if you have comments.
Well, I appreciate that explanation, because I do remember reading that last night and wondering what it meant. And, but now I understand, and I'm sure the final plan can be elaborated on, but generally that strategy, sounds right to me.
I'm just looking at our prioritization map to remind myself of what's classified as high near. Yeah, we do have kind of going up to Brook Knoll. We one of the factors that was included in the last prioritization exercise was development pressure, and so certainly things that were on water and sewer, which includes near the growth center, received higher, were nudged upward in priority. But they also were often lower in other aspects.
Right.
Like connectivity to other concerned parcels and so on.
So are we suggesting that we add a component to that prioritization that it would include the equity and inclusivity, and then that be weighted just like the other ones are? I think, is that what we're thinking about?
That's a good question, Gary. I didn't read that as being prescriptive, more like a placeholder that, because this is the town plan, it doesn't set policy, it just says we'll look into that.
Are we in the ERF section here? There's something that talks about is that the Conservation Commission will reconsider the ERF priority map. Is that?
Which one is that? Which number?
That create new conservation?
There we go. The last action under contribute to ERF. I think this kind of covers it. The Conservation Commission will consider the ERF priority map to ensure the map reflects the goals of the plan and current demands of land conservation in the region. I think that covers it.
Interesting.
Well,
how-
but
yeah.
yeah, except for it doesn't, I think our town, maybe more than others, I don't know, but I think some kind of mention of, equity and inclusivity in there, because that might not be in the regional thing, in the demands of the land conservation in the region. Just
Yeah, I think that's right, Gary, and this calls out climate change specifically, but it doesn't call out the prior reference to equity and inclusion, and
Yeah.
I think that you could say due to processes like climate change, urbanization, and
yeah,
and
economics,
Yeah.
yeah.
there's a lot of other processes at play here other than just climate change.
And without trying not to confuse you too much, I think that there's also from my perspective, some recognition that Todd's efforts as or whoever is, working in Parks and Rec and trying to establish more parks,
Mhm.
that
Recreation.
some of these goals that we're talking about with creating more accessible public spaces and natural areas, and we could be pulling in the same direction as Todd. And I think that there may be a discussion about, it doesn't seem like that's the intent of the ERF to fund Parks and Rec.
Mhm.
And so maybe there's some definitional kind of stuff in there about what a piece of conserved land that the ERF is funding looks like versus a community park. So as Todd sees it.
Does that sound, it sounds to me like ERF policy, which is what the plan doesn't get into.
Right, and maybe that's a good point. Maybe we would wait, but just state that the ERF policy will be amended and then that conversation happens later.
Laura.
Fair point.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think I've said this before, for example, action, create a public conservation area park on the northern Finney Crossing parcel. That should have been done when Finney Crossing was put in,
Yeah.
and we need to require it. Somehow we need to require it. We require a bike path. If we had required it, we wouldn't have to do it and it wouldn't be on us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
point.
to hire a consultant to design public access to it, and
Yeah, and a lot of small places add up to something much bigger when you're talking about the growth center.
Agreed. Yeah,
that's
Good
interesting.
that's an interesting parcel too. I think that maybe was included in some sort of transfer of development rights thing with Finney Crossing.
This is the property north of Chelsea Place.
Yeah, talking about the annex, it actually was Finney Crossing. It stretches across the Allen Brook, and it's the parcel that just abuts like the Barrett Lane. There's trails back behind Barrett Lane.
Yeah, by you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you like to jog back in there on the
I do.
trails. Yeah,
I
that,
do.
Yeah. So, thank you, Laura. That's
yeah.
That's all on the map right now.
It's green because it was probably because it was subdivision, open space. Can we scroll back up for a second to the future conservation through easements and acquisition?
I also had a question back on that. Section.
Okay, yeah, there's strategy number 2 there. Yeah, reassess the ERF policy to include equity and inclusion, balance of recreation and natural environment. That, to me, that kind of addresses also addresses that equity and access for population center.
I had a quick question about the ERF policy. Did we write that, or was that some kind of state suggestion of how we're allowed to use those kind of funds, or does anybody remember how that was developed in the beginning?
I believe it's a Williston policy. for
Okay,
our-
so it's something
for our
we could,
fund.
yeah, so we could change it, at least, I mean, maybe a long process, but it's possible.
Well, that actually speaks to the benefit of not being in a land trust, because if you, I saw those comments throughout, and I kind of like, the ERF has maximum flexibility for us. A land trust, you start narrowing what you can do with it. That's a counterpoint to several of these recommendations that pointed towards exploring a land trust. I don't know, to me, I don't know, personally, a land trust sounds like a black hole of bureaucracy, and then it locks you into very specific activities, whereas right now we have.
Acquisition, you mean, as an alternative?
Sorry,
But you mean like actual acquisition of
Right.
land as an alternative?
like acquisition and then steps to take, I mean, that's a great function for the Vermont Land Trust, but like, we could use the ERF for a broader set of activities.
I'll just answer, I don't mean to.
Yeah.
But, and I want that conversation to happen, but, just to answer Gary's question, it is a select board policy, it needs to be amended by the select board.
Yeah,
Okay.
we could propose
So it's
amendments, but the select
For
board.
the ERF.
ERF use policy, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that as well. I would not be surprised if it's modeled after some state guidance for these types of whatever bylaws or programs statewide. But yeah, I think that's a select board call ultimately. Regarding the land trust concept, I guess I see it, Dave, as just as another tool in the town's toolbox for this type of work. It doesn't have to be all encompassing. And it can be used to augment the tools that we have with in partnerships that we have with Vermont Land Trust and other groups now.
Purchasing conservation easements has been cheaper than purchasing land, for instance. Is that what you mean, Eric?
Yeah, and that if Williston or a group of towns wanted to put together their own land trust, then that would presumably allow us to conserve lands that aren't necessarily a priority for larger groups, organizations like the Vermont Land Trust. We've come across that a few times, not often, but a few times, I think, over the years, where we have a parcel that's been considered for conservation here in town, but land trusts are like, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't really meet our criteria. It's not enough acreage, or not enough, there's not whatever, not rare species or something there that would be conserving habitat. But for whatever reason, it was important for the town to try to conserve it. And that's how I see a town-owned or town-managed land trust being useful. I don't see it as something that would replace a Vermont Land Trust acquisition, for example.
Thanks for that clarification, Eric. And for biting on my intentionally provocative comment that is not as well informed as your own. I actually had a comment on this section because I did not see Jacob Krantz or that parcel referenced. And I think that if we are on the sort of dawn of making that space more publicly available and accessible, I'd love to see it incorporated into the plan. Similarly, Catamount could be used as an example as well for that forestry project that happened last year. Is a great example of how we took a recreational area and turned it into a not only is it conserved, but it's a now biologically productive and totally different landscape, in that area. So I guess that was just a broader comment that sometimes these plans can get really focused on like what we don't have, and we want to do more of this and more of that. But like, I also think that we should just also say like, okay, well, what are we going to do with Brownell Mountain? What are we going to do with Jacob Krantz? Are there differences in land use and management for those parcels? And how can we do more projects, you know, like the forestry project at Catamount?
Yeah.
Would a comment like that be appropriate in either the? I guess I don't really see where, where it should, maintenance of existing conserved areas, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I mean, to your point about the Jacob Krantz parcel, I agree that having that in the plan, even if it's something that's ongoing as we adopt this plan. You know, the hope is that becomes a reality probably before this is adopted.
But if we hit a stumbling block, we could still be working on it during this plan.
Right, there could be some recognition that that is an ongoing project and still stating those objectives for that place.
You could say
I
something
think
like
is valuable.
finalize a public conservation area or park at the Jacob Krantz site.
And focus on outreach
Yeah,
and
Like the rollout of it.
Yeah, you know, just
right, and I think even just beyond the establishment of it, there's maybe some questions about future trails there and, you know, we talked about accessibility in the last meeting. I think, Dave, you made the point about, you know, creating an accessible access to that
Mhm.
park.
Mhm.
And that maybe that isn't from the, Global Foundries parking lot. And so some recognition of that, obviously, that's a discussion to be had. But yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, we don't have any actions in here that specifically talk about accessibility.
That's right.
And I think it would be good to at least have an example in there, says, like, maybe the action is assess our conserved areas and country parks to identify opportunities to improve accessibility
Mhm.
to more users. Doesn't mean every park needs to be, but for instance, the Vermont Adaptive trail improvements at Mud Pond Country Park were a good step, and establishing a wheelchair accessible or something like that recreation spot would be another good step.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'd also like to call out, I know that's something that Catamount's working on right now too. As part of their trail
Yeah.
comprehensive plan, is having much more adaptive, accessible trails out there. And so that's, I think, to your earlier point, Dave, about including Catamount in here, there are a number of documents that talk about the goals and the purpose of Catamount, and referencing those in this plan is something that needs to be added to, and kind of wondering where exactly to put those right now, but definitely hear you.
Great. A quick question and then we'll go to Reed. What's the verification code to get into the document?
It gets emailed to you. It'll be in the top of your email. Yeah, I couldn't get in though.
Oh, I received the secure, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you for, I'll try to go in and add some of those comments into this section, Andrew, so it's not all off of memory. But
Yeah,
that's helpful, and I wanted to point out that Bolton just opened adaptive trails.
Mhm.
And I haven't seen them yet, but it's
They're
sounds,
supposedly very good.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure their trail network is insane. Some a little hairier than others, but that would be an example of like the regional, you know, like there are regional resources for that sort of thing. So like, you know, calling out that, you know, recreation and, you know, is not just for, you know, as we understand it today. It can evolve, right? And that Catamount seems like a great place for that, plus the carriage trail.
I don't know, this isn't all that, if you want to kill it, Dave, go ahead, I won't be offended, but do we know if the adaptive trail that was rebuilt or built was it last year, 2 years ago, how much use that gets?
Where?
Mud Pond.
Over at
Country
Mud
Park.
Pond.
Oh, the quiet connector?
The Quiet Connector, and then
Yes,
there's a loop right in the country park. There's a specific trail loop where they widened
Right.
crossings and stuff to make it
Oh,
accessible.
okay.
I bet Vermont Adaptive would be able to tell us how much use they are aware of, because I know that they refer people where to go and
Mhm.
rent out equipment and sometimes even like people to help teach folks who want to get into adaptive riding. So,
That is a good point, though, is, you know, it has come up. I remember that coming up in the context of ARPA discussion, was using some of those ARPA funds for tracking usage. So that.
yeah, we asked for like trail counters,
Trail
there were
counters.
ways to,
Still would like to know if any of our recommendations were. Except,
no, not that I'm aware of.
yeah, anyway, so that is a fair point to call out, though, in this,
Would that go in the
In-
parks chapter though, Andrew? Is that where it would
well,
kind of nestle in?
maintenance of existing conservation areas and town-owned land. I mean, it could just be a simple, you know, action item to, you know, develop
For usage.
means for tracking and measuring usage.
Yes, and it may be both.
You're in both
Yeah,
chapters.
exactly, right.
Okay.
Reed, did you have any?
Yeah, that section we were on where it had like actions about creating an Abazim and a Hannock Park and the Finney Crossing North space. I wanted to propose an additional action, and maybe this again is one that needs to show up in multiple chapters, or Andrew can veto it and say, nah, it actually belongs somewhere else, but something like seek to create connections to existing conserved areas around the growth center. For instance, we've talked about a Taft Corners 5 Tree Hill pedestrian connection. So you don't need a car necessarily. If you want to go up to 5 Tree Hill and look out from the top of that, if you could hike from the growth center up to it, that would be a pretty epic recreation opportunity.
So I will say, in light of that, I think in addition to that, there have been some conversations about other types of accessibility, like make other ways of making those places more accessible. Maybe through bike paths or like a rec path type mode of transportation, or also transit, because I think it was Melissa's comment that was talking about how it needs to be accessible to all. And so just making it accessible through active recreation, you know, that's something to consider. I do think that there is some tension, and the yellow team has talked a little bit about this, between focusing on connections between natural areas in the growth center and natural areas to natural areas, and focusing on establishing those areas throughout town. And so there's sort of a question of, do we put resources into making what we have more accessible, or do we add to the number of areas that we have? And, you know, maybe make them, you know, closer to the growth center so they are naturally more accessible. And I've seen arguments, you know, they were for both. Yeah. I think useful conversations, and I think that those are really valid questions to have.
In my view, it has to be both, because you don't want to narrow yourself in. You don't know where the opportunities are going to arise.
Right.
For instance, when Vermont, we weren't thinking about making the country park trails adaptive rider accessible. But when Vermont Adaptive approached us and said, hey, we've been looking at what's out there and we think this existing trail could be upgraded, we were like, oh, absolutely. But it wasn't something we were pushing to do. So I think we have to remain open to both improving accessibility of existing parks as well as creation of new parks, so that whichever opportunity arises, we can take it and move toward the overall goal.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, Andrew, could you just tell me what you mean by micro transit? Is that like buses that transport people in wheelchairs, or is that?
Yes, that could be.
It's a transit system smaller than a bus system. So they're not
Okay.
full-size buses. You'd be using like vans or mini buses, that type of like
Are those
smaller
on call?
vehicles. this would,
Like, don't follow a specific route, they pick you up and take you to a place, is that?
I think they can be.
Yeah.
they could be on fixed routes, they can be via apps, or like you can request, hey,
Yeah,
you know, there's people waiting on this line, so we're gonna send a microtransit
Okay.
vehicle on that line, because we have like 5 requests for a ride, or
Mhm.
it can be adaptive to needs, and it also can be like a fixed schedule. But yeah, they're basically systems that are smaller than like a city bus system.
Okay.
Just for a town, so it wouldn't be like, oh, it's gonna go from here to Colchester, it's like, oh, it's gonna be just within Williston, or maybe connecting to neighboring towns,
Okay.
with smaller vehicles.
so Andrew made a quick note in this section under maintenance of existing. About just adding some action, additional actions that we've been talking about.
Great. I don't see it yet, but my connection's bad. So
Yeah, you know, it took me a little while to get there. Okay. I want to recognize that we have about 15 minutes left for this chapter. I do think that we're sort of bouncing around, but that seems like that's okay.
Conversation has been good.
Conversation has been good, I agree. Reed's got his hand up, sounds like, so go ahead, Reed.
Yeah, I have 2 specific suggestions for the contribute to ERF, maintenance of ERF priority map section. One is the strategy. I think this is a little bit more on the wordsmithing side, but because the ERF is so critical to our work, it seems like it might be helpful. In my mind, the strongest way to word the strategy would be to make it continue to contribute to and invest in the ERF to ensure the town can achieve its land conservation goals. Basically tie the ERF strategy to our goals, as opposed to just altruistic, oh, we should fund it because we should fund it.
Yeah, that's a good comment.
And then within the actions, I felt like there should be a dedicated action around considering funding the ERF through methods such as a penny on the tax rate to protect funding for long-term conservation goals from indiscretion, from short-term, issues or budget challenges and stuff. So I felt like having a dedicated action that says we'll look into methods such as a penny on the tax rate. I don't want to box us into that. Maybe there's something we haven't thought of that. But I wanted to see it listed specifically.
I think that's consistent with my comment from the previous agenda item too, which is what I was gonna sort of add.
See it in the plan.
Yeah, is that like exploring funding could be in combination with like, a larger town effort to fund a bunch of things that aren't getting funded to the level that we need them to. And this committee knows I'm never gonna get in the way of a bike path, right? So there's a lot of things the town needs to do to make strategic investments in itself. Capital, parks, conservation, all of that. So I would like the ERF to be part of that larger plan, not this own like standalone thing. And that's the context I would like to see, is that there are ways for Williston to invest in itself that future generations will be the beneficiaries of.
Couldn't agree with that statement more.
And that includes a strategy for the ERF, right? But it's not the only thing.
Yeah. We should put that in our memo.
Yeah. I think so.
Well, we've got the meeting recorded, so we can reproduce it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Laura?
I don't have anything.
Okay. I thought you were ready.
I can keep going. I don't
I
want to dominate the
would
conversation.
expect nothing less. Go
I have
ahead.
comments on the outreach to landowners section that we haven't really touched on yet. So maybe I can move us there and see if others also have comments. Okay. I think the most important comment I have is, I felt like there's something that's missing so far in the language overall is the concept of a land ethic in Williston. I think it's contributed to what we have for conserved land so far, and I also think we should, as a conservation commission, be kind of like nurturing a land ethic in Williston. And so I was gonna propose that second action add nurture a land ethic at the end of it. So the Conservation Commission will develop informational materials to assist landowners in decision-making for the management and or conservation of their land, semicolon, nurturing a Williston land ethic. And I don't know if the land ethic concept should be mentioned in the background of the beginning of the chapter too, but I think it's worth calling out that we have people like Dan Boomhauer who have, they could have easily developed their land and they have chosen to seek to conserve it in some way, even if it may not be convenient. And I think we should recognize past demonstrations of a land ethic and then also be like encouraging that going into the future. I don't know how others feel about that land ethic concept, but
It's an interesting idea. Very Gary Snyder view. I do kind of like how this section opened with a little bit of that flavor. We're straddling, I mean, that's why we live here, is it straddles the Champlain Valley, but enters the foothills. It's a very unique, but I think that, I mean, personally, just that's how I connect with it. Is that there's a place, there's a geographic space. You have more, Reed?
oh, I can keep going if others don't. The next strategy, which is support efforts to develop a Williston land trust. I felt like it was missing actions, and so I wanted to propose some actions that we could consider.
What strategy are you on now?
It was number 8. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 9. 9, okay. So under that, actions that came to my mind were the Conservation Commission will explore creation of a land trust through local and regional outreach. And the Conservation Commission will seek to conserve smaller, high priority parcels that are harder to conserve with conservation easements by leveraging or whatever through regional land trusts or state level land trusts. Thought those might be starter actions to consider if we're going to keep that strategy. Having actions, I think, is important to show what direction we might head with it. And in my mind, I don't know whether it's going to be the right tool for us, and whether the effort will be worth the payback, because it seems like there might be some level of significant effort involved in creating a regional or a Williston land trust. But it seems like we have to at least do the outreach and have the conversation to see whether there's an opportunity there. And then if we do create one, then leverage it for the things that we can't use Vermont Land Trust or Trust for Public Land.
There's a placeholder in the comments here from Eric that says similar things, and so I'm just gonna add to that that there need some action items. Okay. I think we covered maintenance of existing conservation areas and town-owned land.
I have one suggestion for that section if there's time for it.
Yep. 7 minutes.
A strategy that I think we could consider adding to that section on maintenance of existing conservation areas and town-owned land is developing and maybe it doesn't belong in this chapter, maybe it's somewhere else, Andrew, but developing a wildlife human conflict resolution strategy for the town, engaging community as partners in protecting thriving local ecological systems and de-villainizing wildlife species. That ending piece is a little bit more, but I just, I see how many people post seeing a bobcat as a scary thing.
Yeah.
And that tells me
Fair.
that there's education because
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has ever been seriously injured by a bobcat.
I know.
But people get afraid of it, and it's like, to me, that's evidence of a lack of human wildlife
Right.
relationship.
It's such an interesting point because I've observed that too. And it does drive me nuts because we saw that bobcat going through our backyard and it was like the highlight of our season.
Yeah.
Right.
It was amazing. But I did
I-
not think post it to Front Porch Forum and it's like, bring your cats
Look out.
outside. Yeah. it was-
I just saw a bobcat running across Mountain View a few weeks ago, coming from what would be the Jacob Krantz parcel.
Oh.
There are a lot of bobcats from Williston. We have one too.
So it might belong somewhere else in the plan, but I'm hearing some nods and some yays. I just think
I think it's a
somewhere
good
we have to address that the town should have a role to play in helping the community understand wildlife and feel a relationship to the wildlife that we still have.
Including insects.
Yeah,
Oh.
well, that's outreach right there.
What
Insects,
about
big-
what about bringing bird feeders in after April 1st or whatever for bears?
That would be a centerpiece. I mean, bears would be a centerpiece of it because they're in people's faces. And high risk for people and for the bears. So, but yeah, that wherever that could go, I would love to see something in the plan.
I like that read a lot.
Could include beavers. Right, too.
Yeah.
Like managing community reaction to changes in the Allen Brook based on beaver activity, and you know, the boardwalk got wrecked and that screwed up a whole bunch of stuff for the town and for people who use the boardwalk. And we didn't have a strategy in place for how to communicate about what's happening, but in the future, it'd be great if we did that, something that we could just take and start re-upping in Front Porch Forum and stuff, like visit our wildlife conflict page or wildlife. Maybe that's the wrong word for it, but visit our page about like how to live alongside wildlife to learn more about what we're doing about beavers in town. Or
Yeah, it could also be in the green section, just like a little thing from the Conservation Commission. It would be very easy to write.
yeah. Did you see a bobcat? Here's some different perspectives to think about.
Yeah, and I think it would generate a lot of interest too.
It's not a mountain lion, for those who are wondering.
Yeah, it's
see
not
this
a
stuff.
catamount.
I saw a catamount walking around. No, you didn't.
They're
was-
extinct.
I think it was probably not a catamount, but I will at Catamount a couple of years ago on a very early morning run. I saw full-size gray mountain lion on the trail, and it was like no joke. That was a mountain lion.
Wow.
Yeah,
Sometimes they do come in looking for mates and they travel through and they just never find a mate.
yeah. He or she was crossing the trail, saw me, and I just went the other way. And then, but he like disappeared into the brush, and it was wild.
Tim's trying to join, by the way.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was super cool. By the way, when we did see the bobcat, we called the town and said, is there anything that we need to do? And they said, is it hurting anyone? And we said, no. And then they were like, okay, then you're fine. So the town does have a response if you call.
Yeah, but maybe there's more we could give them to that they would be able to.
They
do for
were, yeah, I
someone.
mean, it was a good message. It was like, we share wildlife, blah, 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 you know.
Like the town could have like a Facebook page that people can post their wildlife photos to, so that everybody can enjoy. Like our neighbors took this beautiful photo of a bobcat in their driveway, and we have it up in our kitchen. But the only reason we have it is because they're our neighbor. But if they'd been able to post it, I guess it also showed an observer at that point. But yeah, it's a way for people to like share. Maybe it's an
Yeah.
Instagram page that people can share their photos to if they just want to appreciate wildlife in Williston. That would be a way to develop that appreciation.
That's a great idea. That's a good action item for that strategy.
There you go.
Outreach and education. All right, we are getting our friends from the Winooski Valley Park District on the call, so I think with the last 2 minutes, Andrew, was this what you needed? And okay,
Definitely, that was
Great.
very helpful. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. So thank you for taking the time outside the meeting to read through and. Yeah, I think this really falls into your wheelhouse, and so it's good that we spent the time that we did talking about this.
sure.
We didn't talk about water quality, which showed up at the very bottom of the notes, but Muddy Brook and Allen Brook. Yeah,
Watershed health is coming.
okay, good, okay, then we can ignore it.
I did add a couple notes through the conversation, just as like little placeholders
That's great.
and memory jogs.
Thank
So
you.
There's a lot of comments in there.
A lot of notes.
Some good notes
That was
too.
really productive.
Yeah, it really was. So
Great.
thank you again.
All right, welcome our friends from Winooski Valley Parks. Hey, Tim.
There, unmuting is better. Good morning. Hi, Tim.
Thanks for joining us here, guys.
Yeah.
This agenda is all you.
I'll give a quick update. You guys have already been meeting for an hour and a half, so you're probably exhausted. Things are marching along. The lawyers are now working with each other directly between Global Foundries and us as of yesterday, which is always great. And Nathan Fisk, who's the regional operations manager, has been tremendous. And so just a quick list from his most recent email, the goals being that we're looking to have the parking area deeded to the park district, so it would be subdivided and we would be the owner of the parking area. We develop a shared right-of-way so that the path, there's still some details around exactly where the path would go, but we would have a permanent right-of-way going through the rest of the solar property that could move over time if projects require them to move it, but we'd be guaranteed that we'd have that right-of-way. They also want to make sure that Velco and GMP can get through that area, which is no problem with us. There would also be a shared gate. We have similar situation in other parks where multiple entities will be using the same gate. So you'd have us and Velco and GMP and Global Foundries probably utilizing the gate, which would be right at the parking lot. So there would be no vehicles or motorized vehicles or bicycles beyond that point. And the expectations of the Global Foundries is that all the costs associated with this would be the park districts. We've met with VHCB and they were very encouraging, and we're going to be applying for a feasibility grant, actually a couple of them. We're still putting together the costs because they were encouraging that we should encompass as many costs as possible within the grant. And I also mentioned to Nathan is that I don't know exactly how things work in Williston with zoning, but make sure that Global Foundries stays on top of the fact that they may get some kind of credit for working with us on conservation. So he was going to make sure that his people do that. And I also reminded him that, we need to coordinate the message going forward because they have been consistently supportive of us, even though it took all this time. So they obviously would like to get some good PR out of this, and so the message going out is great. There was a great article in the Observer that Tim had a quote with, which everyone's pretty happy with, which really reflected where we're at. So that's really what I got. Did I miss anything, Tim?
No, I think that is where we have gotten to since last week there. Yeah, moved along a little bit for sure.
And so big question, we have two big questions. One is, many smaller ones, but big questions are, how does this get rolled out in the public domain? In terms of how we message this, what kind of input, and at what points do we gather? I think as a start, staying on the commission agenda is a great idea, so we can get brief updates, and it's just an automatic opportunity for the public to weigh in. And then the opportunity to name the park. And how, I don't think the Jacob parcel really rings as a, and as far as we know, Jacob was not insistent that the name remain on the parcel. We just used that name because it was one of the donors. So any thoughts about that over the next couple of meetings would be really helpful. I think it could be really fun. We don't intend to come in and just name it ourselves. We want the community to have the input. And
yeah, I'm quoted in the paper as saying it should be a community naming. So that was just an off the cuff remark. It's not reflective of a plan, but I certainly I like that idea. Reed?
Yeah.
I had a comment. I've had some conversations with just various community members about the fact that we're trying to create a park there. And one of the piece of feedback I got was a suggestion that we should do some research into whether there were Native American names for that area of the Winooski River or things like that to consider in the naming. That's something we've been, I know, Catamount with the naming of things, and we're talking about a forest park near the Allen Brook School, and it has a Native American name as well as a
Yep.
English name. So just something to consider. And then I had a question for you, Nick and Tim. Has it come up at all about access for Global Foundries employees to the park? I know that their facilities are generally on the Essex side, but I was just curious
Yeah.
whether they've talked about wanting to have like a primitive trail that their staff could use to access it.
It, not specifically, no, not at all. That's not been part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And, going forward, intuitively, you look at that 400 acres that they have there and the wildlife values, and it's a major deer yard. And so I think after we do this, well, now that we've developed the relationship, I think they could do some things with their property there going forward as well. Not only for trails, but also for protecting.
When Nick, Tim, and I walked it with and a handful of others, Simon's there, the Global Foundries rep was like the operations, the director for that site. And he made a comment that like in his professional capacity, he gets on that side of the river at once or twice a year.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, it doesn't even exist
Yeah.
for them kind of location. And other than the gates that the GMP crews use, it's basically like
Inaccessible.
yeah, out of sight, out of mind, not given a lot of thought, basically. And there's no bridge, obviously, other than the main
Up by
bridge.
Redmond Road, they'd have to cross and then, yeah. Okay. I was just curious if it had come up.
Mhm.
Just to rewind a little bit, I'm biased towards the Native American naming as well. And I actually already went down a rabbit hole and and looked at mapping various maps that have been done for there was nothing jumped out, but that would just be a spectacular outcome. The other interesting thing about that site is it's a shoreline of the old Champlain Sea. So, I mean, I don't know how that turns into a name, but it's just the geology is fascinating when you look at the old mapping that the Basin Program puts up. So it's right on the shoreline. So those two things jumped out.
If we wanted to do let's talk about the name, I guess. If it's on your mind, Nick, how have some other park names in your network sort of come to pass? And
Oh boy.
have a blueprint that we can easily pull from.
Well, I'm just smiling because Tim's been around longer than I have. It seems like it relates to who most recently owned the land or the farm that was there. McCrae Farm. We've got and then Ethan Allen Homestead, and that's a good question. The most recent naming was Derway Cove, and that was because it's just a small subset of the Derway Island complex, and we didn't want to give it some major new name for a 2.5 acre parcel. But we don't have a specific process. We get a great process in terms of evaluating whether we're going to take on a park, but we don't have a naming process or a policy at the park district. So the answer is we haven't done it for a long time, and I'm not sure what the best approach is. But it does seem like a really cool opportunity to get people sort of invested in the property and get connections. I'm not sure how to go about that.
Yeah, I guess our other most recent one was Walcott, which,
Yes.
that came with a request from the family that was donating it to be, Walcott Family Natural Area, and they'd been in the area a long time. I think sort of before that, we were a little bit trying to get out of, naming it for people, just because people have different relationships and people view different people differently over time. But yeah, I think mostly we were always, shooting for a feature of the land or the landscape or the history of the land seemed to be our Colchester Pond or Salmon Hole, things like that.
Okay, so then Nick, curious, you said you went down a rabbit hole. Is there a particularly compelling Native American name for the landscape that you?
I couldn't find one. I mean, it was a half-hour rabbit hole, and I just was looking at mapping to see, because there are a bunch of really interesting maps been put together over recent years, especially during the recognition of the tribes back in the early 2000s. But I couldn't find anything other than large swaths of land that were dedicated to different subsets of tribes. I was hoping to find that area had a specific name. So no, I didn't go very far down that, but it struck me too that would be just such a great thing on a cultural level, but it's informative, it's instant history. You ask the question, why is it named that? And we could have an interpretive sign and talk about, I mean, that's the other thing. There's an opportunity to tell the story about the land, that it's not just what happened since 1750. So
you could do something like the Abenaki language that would be used to describe the beach of the Champlain Sea, or
yes,
a beach, or so you could kind of
exactly, yep,
play off the features and the Abenaki language and find something.
So maybe we could all, I figured I'd sort of bring that up at this meeting, and maybe the next meeting, we could sort of land on something a little bit more in terms of an idea of how to go forward with that. I mean, do we put an article in the Observer and ask for ideas and publish the ideas, or do we do a quieter process and decide that it is a Native American name? And I'm sitting right next door to Alnabai, so they have a lot of resources that could help us with that. So if you guys can think about that and have some more specific direction the next meeting.
Andrew, what would the town, I guess, we would, what's the perspective that the town would have on something like this?
Yeah, I can't remember who said it last meeting, but there was there's the concern over having it being, someone suggesting that it's named something like Parky McParkface. I think that was you, Dave. Which is
that wasn't my quote.
Okay. Legitimate concern. And so I think that having some sort of vetting process through partnership with the park district and this committee, I think makes sense. Where the list of names comes from is I think the big question. Do we want to have a smaller group like this group try to come up with a list of options, and then eventually the public votes on it? Do we want to open it up to the public to suggest names? Given how this conversation is going, it seems like it's pretty open. As it doesn't seem like there's any obvious way to do it, but I think that, I agree that getting the public involved in this process would be beneficial. Maybe add some excitement about this project, but we want it to be controlled and constructive and
what I'm hearing in answer to my question is that we could either create like a subcommittee of people in this committee and the park district and come up with a list of names and share those names, 5, 6, have it be like an observer vote or something like that. Or alternatively, we could solicit suggestions or have like some kind of online name convention, and then maybe winnow those down to top 5 or something like that. Seems like 2 different scenarios. One would certainly be longer than the other. So I guess the first question is there urgency to getting a name to this? Or sounds, I've seen reactions in the room, it's a no.
It's a no. I just, and also another point is if the decision is made that a Native American name is a good idea, you sort of, you kind of have to go that direction, because then we start consulting with people, and if we get ideas from them and we don't use that name, that's insulting. So that's why I didn't want to jump into it. And, we have, they teach Abenaki language right next door here.
Wow.
So we could get people really engaged in a fun way if we decide to go that direction. If we don't use their name, I think that would be kind of insulting. So
Good point.
there's not a rush to it, and I think it's a cool idea too. But I'd love to have, you folks sort of think that through, and then we can come up with a convention. We're gonna have enough details to deal with over the next few months with the permitting and the park development and the grantsmanship and so forth, that we won't miss it if we don't have to come up with a name over the next couple of months. I don't think it'll break our heart, but we should think about it. And I think everyone's deciding that Jacob Parcel is probably not a great park name.
That's a good thing we can make a decision on. Eric, I see your hand is up, and then we'll go to Reed.
Yes.
I agree with Nick on all counts, particularly the Abenaki name. If we want to go that direction, I agree. We go that direction and don't look back. I guess I would say that I also agree that it's not necessarily urgent to name the parcel or the park, but the sooner that we name it, the easier it'll be to do outreach and brand it and all that. So just from a public recognition perspective and stepping into that outreach work that we were talking about earlier, the sooner there's a name, then the more effective the outreach work can be. But I agree. I don't think it's urgent, but just there's that. I'm just putting that out there.
Good point.
Thanks. Yeah, Reed.
I had a quick question and then a suggestion about process for naming. Question is there a point that we need to get to before doing any public engagement to be confident that the park is going to be established? Nick and Tim, is there like a milestone that we're getting close to that you then would be like, okay, engage the public in naming this thing because it's actually going to happen?
That's a good question, because a lot of chicken and egg with this. But our board, we do need to have another formal vote with our board. We get approval for every step of the way, and we do have a process in-house, and we've run through a lot of that process. I do need to have one more thing, and it was clear that we didn't want to move forward without access. And now that the access is all of a sudden looking like it's going to happen, I do plan to go back to the board and say, okay, I need, conditional on getting the Global Foundries access in place, that we would go ahead and formally request the park, having the park transferred from the town of Williston to us.
Yeah.
So I have one more step in my process.
Okay.
And part of that is establishing with the town, that it's not going to create stress on your services, that it's acceptable to the neighbors, that, all that stuff. We do want to make damn sure that there's not something we're not thinking of, some right of way that we haven't seen. It's a relatively complex piece of real estate in terms of the historic overlays of stuff, but we think it's clear. And we've done a soft title search, but there's still some legal work to be done just to make sure. So it's a long way of saying I have one more piece of my process with my board, and we really want to make sure that the town is okay with this. And maybe that's a short piece with the select board before the transfer. I don't know. I'm trying to think on your end what makes the most sense for process. In other words, do you go to the select board with the whole thing? Or is it in phases where we report to them where we are and then go back again once or twice before the park is actually transferred? Because, we all think intuitively it's a good idea, and it is a good idea, but, there's always that thing you don't think of. And we just want to make sure that that's not still out there.
What I'm taking from your answer, Nick, is that even if we decided today how we're gonna go about naming things, which we're not.
Yep.
We wouldn't do that actual next step of engaging the public in any way if we were gonna engage them until at least one more step in your process.
I think so, yeah. I want to give my board one more swipe at it. And it'll go well.
Yeah.
But I do want to give them.
And thank you, Reed, for the question, because it's really good. You said that the conversation with the Williston Select Board is for a decision making of some kind, and what exactly is that? Did you say transfer of the
Jacob Krantz parcel.
Jacob Krantz
Yeah,
parcel
yes.
to the district?
Yeah, because I assume that has to go to the select board to become real. So they're going to be asked at some point to make a decision, and it'd be great if by the time we get there, it's a big rubber stamp that's coming down on the proposal versus asking tough questions. Well, I heard from a neighbor that, they've been hunting there for 30 years. And, there's people use lands in ways that are not under the umbrella of what we manage. So that's a small concern in that particular parcel because it's so small relative to other parcels we dealt with. But those kinds of things you want to kind of deal with and be respectful with before we go to the select board and say, oh, we have a park. So I just want to make sure that I don't want to over process the thing to death, but I want to make sure that we haven't missed anything.
Do you think that having a name for that select board transfer is helpful or doesn't need to be?
I have no idea. That's a good question, because I take Eric's point that having a name really kind of consolidates what it is.
Right.
But if we have a name for it already, then those who might have an issue with it might say, well, you've already named the park, and so you've already made a decision you're going to have the park.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, that's also helpful. Sounds like we're in no rush to get a name out. So
I don't think so, but it's fun to talk about. It's part of the fun of it also.
Because I think the name, if we have sort of a series of walks, I like the public engagement of a name, and but I feel like if you don't have these walks beforehand, then people might not really know the land. So without like getting out there and actually, I don't know, seeing the characteristics on the ground could be hard. I feel like really tie you in more if you're out there on the ground and you're like, oh, I noticed this, feature we might not even know exists right now. That could steer us away into a different name.
Yeah, I think well, I guess, Tim, I'm a little confused by your last point there. You think that the walks could actually help inspire the name?
Well, I think so. I think that's, being out there, you might see, I don't know, old trees or some, I don't know, 5 tree, I think was inspired by, there was 5 large maple trees up there at one point in time. I don't know if they still exist, but, different stuff like that.
That's a good point.
Or different habitats. And just the way to be like, you guys are out here on this walk, we're doing some type of invasive removal. Not that you'd want to be like buckthorn forest or something, but but just the way to get people, I think, involved and like excited about what is going on.
So I think the other part of the timeline to consider is the discretionary permit through the town. And we talked about that as a, it has that abutters notice and the public outreach sort of benefit. And it also, I think, Nick made the point about like, the title search and kind of doing our due diligence on looking at this from, all perspectives. And I do think that the discretionary permit process is a really good way to do that, to look at the land and what's being proposed and whether or not that will be allowed. And so I'm kind of seeing with Tim's comment and with all of everyone else's comments, a timeline kind of taking shape where, maybe some walks are the first step. And really the goal would be to have a name by the time that it, goes to pre-application for the discretionary permit. And then I'll put an asterisk on the, the question about the select board. And if, Nick, you asked about having some sort of preliminary meeting with them so that they're aware that it's going on. And I'll I'll ask Eric about the process for that, but I think that the discretionary permit, getting started on that as well, will allow that to flow. And so I think in the short term, kind of a concurrent beginning the public outreach through walks and filing that pre-application is really the way to proceed. And then we can, you know, the timeline of that discretionary permit will probably, I mean, it's going to be 6 months at the quickest.
Yep.
It'll be more of a discussion, and then if we have a name, maybe by the time, you know, it goes pre-application, discretionary permit, if we had a name by the time it goes to discretionary permit, and it's, you know, the proposed parcel name.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Great
Everything,
Yeah.
everything that we're reflecting on here, the idea of getting out, getting the access points tied up, getting the board lined up and approved, and then getting out there to actually see it and experience it and maybe do some maintenance in it to get a sense of the character. That makes a lot of sense. So I think at some point someone's gonna say, well, what's its name? And then we're gonna know, like, okay, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time to figure it out. All right, Reed.
Yeah, all those things are, I think, in line with what I was thinking as a recommendation for naming, and that is, I was thinking as a community member, if it was brought to me as, hey, the town is thinking of naming this park A, B, or C, which one do you prefer? I find that way less engaging than we have this park, come walk it. By the way, we're gonna be opening up a naming suggestion process, whatever.
Great.
Not competition, but
Yeah.
a naming activity that the community can partake in. I find that much more open-ended and much more engaging. But I also agree, if we're going to go down the Abenaki route, we need to decide early to do that and commit to it. So it's made sense to me to do a combination of walks and naming outreach once all of the check boxes in confidence that we're moving forward are done.
Let me put that broadly to say, maybe early or sooner rather than later, we can, in the naming convention at least, determine, do we want to go in historical naming convention, either Abenaki or otherwise, or do we want to go more of at, like Tim pointed out, the 5 Tree Hill, which is more of like
Feature
a
naming or
feature
local,
naming, you know, Anthropocene.
We haven't found any obvious, you know, sometimes, you know, like there's no obvious local moniker, you know, we have sort of asked around about that. I would point out that the Abenaki would not see it as a historical thing. They would see it as recapturing. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, I see your point. I don't know how else you could have used the language, but it's more.
reclaiming identities.
The whole thing is like, they're here now. That's the whole thing. That's what we've learned in our relationship. It's not about, oh, that's something that happened in the olden days. It's here and now, and it's the issues of today, and naming and recapturing is all sort of part of that process. So I'm just going to point that out. It's a subtle thing, but it makes it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're all speaking in draft form.
Yes.
So thank you, Nick. That's helpful.
Reed
Yeah.
Willis asked to comment on the timeline. Reed.
Hi, thanks. I'm just wondering if it's possible for you all to tentatively agree on a timeline goal. So like, we hope to have all these preliminary steps in place by next summer or something like that, because the public sometimes tends to get panicked when they start to hear about things like this, and they think, oh, my backyard's going to be open next week to these hordes of people. So I think if we can steer people to what we want them to expect,
Right.
rather than let them jump to conclusions.
My gut, that's a great point. My gut tells me that we're in a great timeline now, because right smack in the middle of this town meeting day, when everyone pays attention to their town governance. And so it strikes me that if we get into the permit process and we get, we'll be much further along by then. We won't be finished. We'll be in the middle of the discretionary permit process. It'll be a great time to talk about the park. Also, Jason has written his first article in the Observer and did a great job. So we've got we have someone who understands what's going on who will continue to write about it. So, but Reed, yeah, you make a good point. You don't want people to just have it dumped on their lap, but it just feels like we could get into this and we could get the permitting up and going, get our grant from VHCB. And I want to go back to your point about butters. That's using that mailing list is hugely helpful because then you keep people up to date on what's going on.
So if you all at the meeting or maybe next meeting or whenever could just sort of generally agree on we're aiming towards having things in place by some general time, like by next summer. That just sets a general expectation, doesn't tie you down to a certain date. And if you have to shift it, you can always say, well, we were aiming for that, but didn't work out that way or whatever. But I think it's helpful to kind of steer people in the direction you want them to think rather than let it just fall into place.
I thank you, Reed. I think that comment, it was sort of a notable lack of specificity on when access would be, when could you start using that park? Technically, it's open now, it's town property. I don't believe there's any prohibitions from people to use it, right? So, and we know that it is being at least lightly used. There's trails there. So, and it seems like it's mostly backyard residents using that property.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, they will, the access point is not anywhere close to where the current users are actually coming from, which was sort of my point last week. But yeah, I agree. If we talk to the Observer, I do think that we need to have what Reed is talking about a little bit sketched out as far as like what the timeline would be.
Yep.
And make it feel a little bit more newsy for residents.
That's a great point. And, Jason has shown he understands nuance and, so, yeah, I think that's a great point. We should put together a timeline and think about the naming process because that question will come up.
Yeah.
So, I assume we'll stay on the conservation agenda going forward over the next few months. And I feel like I got some good homework here, a lot of homework. And we could think about that. I think the timeline generally for next summer makes sense. We'll know a lot more by the time we meet again. I'll know a lot more about where we at with the permitting process. Part of what they're doing is they're looking at what existing permits there are and how one impacts the other and what we need for subdivision and who's doing the survey and all this stuff. So I don't have a whole lot of that detail yet. And that's sort of the piece that I'm dealing with and Tim is dealing with the actual park development and the trail network and
yeah, great. So Nick, I see we had Eric's hand up. Eric, I think you're gonna get the last word because we're at close of meeting now.
Yeah, and I need to run as well, but I just want to, I guess, point out that we have this strategy note that I assume Nick or Tim put together that has a column with a timeline in it. That's already started. I think that seems like a good starting point. Just build it out from there. But yeah, this is great and good to see the progress here. And I do need to run, but thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Eric. And
Thanks,
maybe
Eric.
that can be the topic for the next meeting is like talking about that timeline.
Yep.
and having that sort of be the point of discussion.
I could follow up with the park district after this meeting, and maybe Nick, Tim, we could have a discussion about like the short-term approach that we could bring back to that next meeting so that we have, we talked about the public outreach, like maybe doing some walks.
Yep.
I'm thinking maybe this fall. And so we could talk a little bit about that before that next meeting.
Sounds great.
Okay,
Great.
good. So that is our agenda for the day. Seeing nothing else, we will adjourn.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Kim.